What's the deal with moths and how do they differ from butterflies? That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome back to Buzz, Blossom, and Squeak. I'm Jill from the North Woods, and this is where we take small steps to understand nature better right outside our front door. Today I'm going to talk about a creature that usually gets either ignored, misunderstood, or confused with butterflies. In fall, we celebrate, the migrating birds, the march of the monarchs flying south. But just outside of our front door, around those porch lights, moths are busy with their own strategy, laying eggs, spinning cocoons, and yes, even a few of them migrating. And we're going to talk about that today. First of all, let's just talk about the difference between moths and butterflies. Most people think of that butterflies and moths, they imagine that butterflies are colorful and the real stars of the insect world, while moths are dull and boring, and maybe they come out at night, and that's just way too simple. So here's some key differences, first of all, between it. Like we said, butterflies are mostly during the day, and then moths are mostly nocturnal. There's a few different day-flying moths out there too, but that's a general rule. Butterflies have thin antennae with little tiny buttons at the end of them, while moths are feathery, maybe a little thread-like, and oftentimes much more elaborate in their antenna than butterflies. Butterflies tend to have a slim body, while moths are often a little stockier, maybe even furrier, and that helps them keep warm on cool nights. And butterflies, usually when they're resting, they rest with their wings upright, folded up, right? Moths rest with their wings flattened or tented over their bodies. The cocoons versus chrysalis. I sometimes use that word interchangeably, and I guess I shouldn't, because moths spin a silk cocoon for the pupal stage, where they go from caterpillar to moth, while butterflies form this hard chrysalis. So there are some main differences. And the other part of it, too, is moths aren't always drab. So here's the cool thing. There's a thing called a Luna moth. It's pale green. It looks like I guess it's supposed to be under a moonlight. When I was hiking about 3-4 weeks ago, I heard this noise, and it actually was really loud, and it sounded like a small critter, was coming out of the woods. And so I just sort of stood there thinking, what is that? And is this thing coming out of the woods, and is it going to eat me? It didn't sound that big, but it was this fluttering noise. And then all of a sudden, out of the woods, and I'll put a picture here, flops out a Luna moth. I have only seen them twice. That was the second time in my life. One time I was at a company picnic, and a Luna moth was on the side of a building. This time, like I said, it came fluttering out of the woods, plopped himself on the path that I was walking on, found a little patch of sun, and what had happened is it rained a lot the previous day and night, and he was trying to get to a place of sun so he could spread out his wings and get that water off of his wings so he could fly better. At first, I thought he was on his way out. And then as soon as his wings started to dry out, because I called Em over and said, look at this guy over here, then he flied away. He flied away just like a moth should, but he was huge and maybe the size of the palm of my hand. There's something called the Cecropia moth, and that is painted with rusty reds and cream. Tiny moths have little metallic flashes of silver and gold. So butterflies won the public relations campaign. We're prettier. We have more going on. But moths have sheer diversity. There's about 750 butterflies species, but that's in the United States, but there's about 11,000 species of moths. Worldwide, moths outnumber butterflies by almost 10 to 1. So you can see that while butterflies get a lot of the attention, the moths are really where the real numbers are at, and much of the more sublime beauty, the least flashy but still beautiful. So what do moths do in fall? Right now, we are right in the midst of fall migration period, and September and October rolls around. Butterflies like monarchs pack up, head south. The moths, however, have a different strategy. Instead of going on a long journey, most moths species focus on getting through the winter. And they do this in a couple of different ways. Is first of all, they will lay eggs in fall, and those eggs survive the freezing months and then hatch in spring. So I had a screen door on my patio, and all of a sudden there was this weird circular design one morning when I got up on the patio door. I'm like, what is that? So I start looking at images and found out that that is moth eggs. They had laid a whole array of moth eggs on my patio door for my deck, and that was incredible. That's one strategy. The other strategy is that these caterpillars, if they are born, survive as caterpillars. But anyway, what they do is they freeze solid, and they thaw out in spring due to some natural antifreeze they have in their tissues. And then the next strategy are cocoons. Many of the moths overwinter as pupae inside the silken cocoons tucked under leaves and attached to branches. Then there's a few adult moths that actually overwinter as adults, hiding under bark, in sheds, looking for warm places to reemerge after spring. So unlike the monarchs, moths don't pack their bags and leave. They hunker down, depending on the actual strategy of that moth. But are there any moths that migrate? And the answer is yes. Now, it's not like the butterflies or the monarchs where they go in this huge area and they swarm on a tree where it's very, very visible. Most monarchs do stay local, but there are a few ones that do take a remarkable journey. So armyworms and cutworm moths, these are both considered pests. These are agricultural pests. They migrate northwards in the spring and southwards in the fall, but it could be maybe a couple hundred miles instead of a couple thousand miles. Sphinx moth, some hawk moths show some sort of a regional migration, like I said, just a little bit, following blooming flowers. The silver Y moth is a European moth. It's a little brown moth that migrates a few thousand miles, crossing the English Channel and flying as far as Iceland. And then there's something that, if you've ever seen them, these are really cool, hummingbird hawk moths. We have hummingbird moths here, but the idea is that they turn in North America, they hover at flowers, so they look like they're hummingbirds, but they actually can travel a long distance. They are fairly large, so a little bit like the Luna moths, so they do migrate. And the difference is really predictability. Monarchs have this regular migration. Moths are opportunists. They chase warm weather, food, favorable winds, and so you might see a mass of them flying or them staying close to home. It just depends on what their signals are telling them about this particular winter. And right here in the North Woods in the Midwest, we have, like I said, this woolly bear moth. It's called the Isabella tiger moth. And like I said, that they cross sidewalks and roads, and the folklore is that the size of their brown band predicts the severity of the winter. Science shows that it's really just how much they grew, right? So it's a great little symbol of the season, even though it's not true. The giant silk moths have wingspans up to 6 inches. I don't think we have them here. Well, let me rephrase that. Part of it is the Cecropia moth, the polymus moths. I don't think we have those here. Luna moths are one of these. And in fall, like I said, they are having cocoons, hanging in trees, ready to overwinter inside those silk pouches. So you might look for one of those in spring during those months. And the sphinx moths, they are strong flyers, like I said, and they can even in late fall hover like hummingbirds at flowers, but then go. So those are some differences between some moths that we have here in the Midwest, adding kind of an additional complexity to our moths. So why should we care about moths at all? And the idea is that, first of all, they are pollinators, just like the bees, and we care a lot about pollinators. Many of the moths are vital nighttime pollinators. And we talked about, in one of the very first videos I did, about nighttime flowers that open up at night, and they are particularly geared for these nighttime flyers. The bees and all the ones that fly during the day, not going to work for nighttime flowers. But these moonflowers and these nighttime bloomers, they're looking towards the moths, and the moths are crucial to their pollination. Even some orchids, some desert plants are pollinated in these very specific ways by specific moth species. And in the end, the moth caterpillars are primary food source for a lot of songbirds. If you love warblers and chickadees, they eat the caterpillars of moths. We talked in an earlier episode about oak trees, and oak trees get galls and they get caterpillars, and that's why there are so many birds attracted to oak trees, because the actual caterpillars themselves are meant to be in the oak trees, and then a lot of birds eat them from there. And the other part of it too is that from bats to spiders, the moths are food also. The caterpillars and then the moths themselves, they're all part of the food chain. And the other cool thing is this year, every year I put plants along my deck. I have these deck rail planters. And this year, my friend Em, she has emsgarden.com, which is a garden website. She, reviews plants and gardening. She's primarily a flower gardener. She suggested to me that I grow something called verbena. And so I did. I bought a bunch of verbena plants. I planted them in my planters. And suddenly I had moths and bees and some wasps all over my deck area because they love verbena. Now, I think in the whole scheme of things, I love the fact that I had so many moths, but it also attracted a number of wasps too. So I think I'm going to plant verbena next year, just maybe a little bit farther away from my deck, because who wants wasps on their deck? The other part of it too is that you think about the fact that they are at night, they're attracted by light. That's why we see them by our door lights, campfires. I see them by the campfires too. But they have some defenses, from their night flying, and the way that they're structured is, first of all, they have something that is called wing dust. And this dust on moths is made of scales. And this helps them provide camouflage. It even helps them escape because these scales rub off. I mean, if you've ever accidentally caught a moth, it can rub off on your hands very easily. That means if a moth gets caught by a spider web, it's usually just the scale parts, and they can fly away, leaving the scales behind in the web. I have a gigantic spider web now on my patio door on the other side. It's huge, and there's this gigantic spider who is living on this web, and I noticed that he has had a whole variety of different bugs in his web, but not moths. I haven't seen a moth yet, and I wonder if that's why. That they are primarily moon navigators. They navigate by night, by the moon's artificial light, which is why sometimes our light bulbs over our porch or our door confuses them. They get attracted to that light, and so sometimes they can be damaged by those lights, or it can leave them vulnerable to other predators. They are the masters of camouflage. Some moths look exactly like dead leaves, bark. Even there's some out there that look like bird droppings. And so they act in such a way that makes them disguise, so they're not quite as easy to eat as they could be. And there's even folklore that moths indoors was linked to the death of a family. In Japan, moths were sometimes linked to restless spirits. And in native traditions in the Great Lakes, moths were connected to fire, light, and transformation. I think about that a little bit all the time. Like, is it butterflies and moths, do they panic when they're going into their cocoons or chrysalis? Like, they think they're dying and then they end up being a whole other life? Yeah, well, I always wonder about what they think of that whole piece. So while moths look like lesser maybe than monarchs and some other beautiful butterflies we have, some of them are downright amazing. Some of them are huge, like the hawks, the hawk moths, the Luna moths. And, if you think about it, the moths have a quieter story. Like I said, they stick around, they try to overwinter, maybe they go a few hundred miles away, and try to see at some point that if you can find some of their hanging cocoons waiting for that next spring to finally come out so they can warm up and escape their slumber. That would be great. So they don't make the headlines. They're everywhere. And their survival strategies are fascinating. Then they're flashier, migrating monarch buddies out there. So the next time you see a moth fluttering around a screen, around a light, or a caterpillar inching along, in that crisp fall air, just kind of remember that you're looking at one of nature's big survivors and keeping the ecosystem healthy and alive, well, by creating a lot of food and pollinating a lot of plants. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Appreciate you listening and learning more about moths. I hope that you enjoyed that take. And so my challenge to you is get out there and go find some moths. Step out maybe at twilight and see if there are some moths that fly back around your porch light. I know moths set off my Ring doorbell, which is kind of cool. But if you have any questions, if you have anything to say for me, you can comment here in the channel. You can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps. I'd love to hear from you and see how you're doing with your nature right outside your front door. Thanks so much and have a great day.